Yeah, so welcome to another Flix and Chat. What is it, 22nd of September on the Uni Project Sheffield. This is the second one what we've put together, and it's linked to the first Flix and Chat what we recorded and went live with last month. The topic being Subnormal, the scandal in the British schools, the documentary which aired on BBC. So first of all, just for people who don't know, who's joined, and people who are going to be watching on the recordings again, just a brief outline of the Unity project, really, so that you're aware of who we are. So Unity Project Sheffield, Unity in the Community. Brief outlining, we're a group of people. You can see the list of people on the right-hand side who have come together from the community to look at ways in which we can help develop and build a more unified community in Sheffield and start to bring back some of the momentum which we had at some points in the city years ago, because we did have that momentum, but for several reasons, some of which we know and some of which we're going to try and discuss on lives what we organize. For some of the reasons we've lost that momentum. So we've just basically got together to see if what we can do and what we can develop, what activities we can put on, and what positive experiences we can put together, see if we can build back that unity in the community. They're the members on the right hand side, like I said. So you got Kevin Scott, who's on the live with us at the moment, who's like the founding member of the project. Myself, Matthew Bent, who will be hosting the majority, if not all, of the Flix and Chats, what we'll be hopefully be doing once a month. We've got Jesvin Clark, Shane Spence, Dylan Nembard, Gavin Griffiths, Ron McKenzie, and Aisha Thompson. And all people are professionals who, most of us work with young people, whether it's in education, youth work, university or college. And other members have skills within IT, graphic design, and various different backgrounds and qualifications. So I don't know if you want to say a little bit more, Kevin, about the project itself.
No, you've done a good job there, brother. All I can say is if anybody wants to know more, then we do have a website, and we do also have social medias, and we have put out a podcast that explains who we are and why we came together in more depth. So if anybody wants that information, I would suggest the best place to go to is either the Instagram page, which is Unity Project Sheffield at Instagram, or you can go to the Facebook page, which again is Unity Project Sheffield. So if anybody wants all that information, it's basically there. And we want people to start using the media platforms to get a bit of traffic on there. So that would really help.
Yeah, so anybody who missed the first Flix and Chat, what we did, obviously, just to recap the basic idea, is on a monthly basis, what we are hopefully going to try and achieve and do is to identify programs, things within the media, movies, documentaries, current news items and articles. We're going to try and get the community to try and look at those, watch them, and then on the next Flix and Chats what's arranged, we then discuss the program what we've watched, and you know, all the spark the discussions what come from that program. So that's the idea of Flix and Chat. This is the second one, like I said, and the first one was around the documentary Subnormal, which aired on BBC. It was back in May now, so it's May on BBC One, but it's still on iPlayer. You can still catch that on iPlayer. I think it stays on for up to like 12 months. I don't know how many months we're in. But if anybody still wants to go and catch that, if they missed it, it's worth a watch. And that's based a lot of the discussions what sparked the first Flix and Chat, and will be the same topic what we'll be working around in this Flix and Chat as well. The difference is on this part 2 of the Flix and Chat, which is like the follow-up, we've also invited a guest speaker to come and speak about issues around education for Black children in Britain, and he's coming from a professional background as he's currently studying a PhD and just finished his research and so on towards that. So it'll be interesting to see what his findings are from his research. Jonathan.
Yo.
I've already given everybody a brief introduction of who you are and what you're about, and why you found it interesting to come and speak at this Flix and Chat discussion platform.
Yeah.
So what I'd like you to do then, if I might as well pass it over to you in a sense, and if you can just further explain who you are, what's your professional background, and why you are here for this interview.
Yeah, well, how you doing, everybody? Look, thanks for inviting me, first of all. But yeah, I'm Jonathan Yahya Williams. So you might hear me from about, people might know me as various different, aliases. But I was born and raised in Sheffield. Went to school here, lived in Sheffield all my life. From parents, like many of us, parents came from Jamaica. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings, all older than me. Got 2 brothers, 2 sisters. So I'm a born and bred Sheffield person. Over the past 20 plus years, I've worked with young people who have been identified as at risk. And whether that's been at risk of exclusion, at risk of becoming disaffected, at risk of reoffending. So I've worked for various different organizations and worked for myself as well in that space. So I work for the voluntary sector, I work for the private sector, I work for the public sector, and currently I'm working in the council as a senior learning mentor, which is looking at reducing school exclusions and increasing attendance. So, my background in terms of working with young people across Sheffield has been sort of on the front line, has been run for like the past 20 plus years. I've got a degree in social political studies that I went to University of Sheffield, and to be honest, I've been at the university for the past nearly 14 years now. So I did an undergraduate, and then I went straight on to do the doctorate, and I'm in the latter part of my doctorate now. I'm just writing up my thesis, so I should be hopefully graduating next year. The doctorate is looking at the links between young people who get disaffected, meaning they end up on the road in a sense, and get involved in crime, antisocial behavior, things like that, and their experiences within the education system. So that's my focus, and it's been very much of a broad topic. So after your guys sort of looked at, I know last session you looked at the documentary that came on BBC. Well, that particular text, that book from Bernard Cord, is one of the key texts that I've used in my research, because my research is looking, I've had to narrow it down because many young people become excluded, disaffected, and end up on the road. But my focus has been looking at the experience of Black Caribbean males. So that book was very key as a foundation, but there's been loads of research in that area. So that's basically me in a nutshell, and what I'm sort of doing and what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years. So the aim is to marry academia with practice, and not just be a practitioner. I'm a practitioner first, and I've gone into academia to sort of enhance that practice and get a better understanding. But I think it's been important. I've learned to marry the both together. So marry academia and marry the work that you do on the ground.
Okay, thanks for that. Actually, that's a good kind of insight into what you're doing and where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Why these topics are interest of you. I mentioned earlier as well, actually, that when you talked before, you said that you'd read the book in relation to this documentary, because I weren't aware initially, but you were saying that it's from a book. What was written?
I've got no turn the light on a bit, bro. This is the book. I recommend everybody get a copy of the book. I remember hearing about Bernard Cord back in the day, but for some reason it just sort of fizzled out. But it's a book that we all should know, and Bernard Cord should be somebody who should be a household name. It's somebody that we should know about, because what they did back then was historic. They uncovered a big scandal. But yeah, I heard about Bernard Cord many years ago, but it's only when I started doing the research I really looked into what happened during that time, and that journey. And that documentary brings it out. So it was that was a key part.
So without going into the book too much yet, actually, I just wanted to ask you, being born and bred in Sheffield, what's been your personal experience going through the school system? What how was it for you? And then leading to that beyond, how did that impact on you as it came into adulthood? If you could just reflect on that for us.
Okay. Well, I went to school, and I think back then, I think the education system's improved in some ways, but there's still some things very much the same. But back then, I didn't have a really good experience at school, at primary or secondary. And what I mean by that is that your parents sent you to school to sort of learn. But my outcome at school was that I left school believing that I was thick. That's what I left school believing. Now, I left school with no qualifications, just one GCSE. And that was the interesting thing, because I wasn't a badly behaved kid at school. Don't get me wrong. Our school back there, when I think about it, it wasn't really a good school. I think it was, at the time, it was one of the bottom schools in the league table. And there was a lot of trouble in the school daily. Yeah, it wasn't really a place where you'd see sort of, educational progression and attainment. But, there was a lot of kids that was causing a lot of trouble. And I did hang around with some of those kids. But what was interesting, I knew where my line was, because I wasn't a kid that was going to swear at a teacher, where many of my friends was. And the reason why that was because my dad had the belt at home, right? So I wasn't going to risk, I knew where I had clear boundaries. So it didn't matter what school I went to, right? It didn't matter who I hanged around with. I was not going to cross that line. So that was really good for me. So I was there to learn for a period of time. I was there to behave. So that's one thing that my parents could do. They could implement things that would make sure that when I go into that environment, I'm going to behave. But what it couldn't do is enable me to get a good education. That's one thing it couldn't do. So I didn't. And like I said, I left believing I was thick, because I was in the bottom sets for everything. And I don't know if anybody has been in the bottom sets. When you're in the bottom sets, it's like many of the education that you get is it keeps you there. The education that you get when you're in the bottom sets doesn't sort of inspire you to progress, because you're in the bottom sets, especially when it gets to GCSE stage, is that you're not part of, you failed already. The focus at that level is on the kids that are at the CD level, to make sure that they're going to get a grade above. So it was bad. The only thing I got was a GCSE in art and design, because I could draw. So that sort of and lo and behold, what happened was, it was funny, because when I was 32, I did a dyslexia test, and they found out I was dyslexic. So that answered a lot of the questions. But so after school, like I said, I had good parents, yeah, that I didn't want to let down. But as you get older, you start to sort of, you get to a certain age. And then I ended up becoming disaffected. I went to college for a period of time, but that was just to keep my mom and dad quiet, right? And to let them know that, I'm doing something, but I wasn't, because there was no real belief there, yeah? So then I dropped out of college, and then I was actually on the road for a period of time. I was disaffected myself. And a wake-up call came when I was 20 and I got stabbed. Not something directly with myself, but I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I actually put myself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that made me start asking questions, because, I thought to myself, how's this happened to me? Why have I ended up here? But then I looked at my journey and where I was at the time, and it wasn't surprising why it did. But then I started to reassess things. But luckily, at that time, I was accessing a place called the Hub. And I don't know if many of you remember that. Well, everybody remembers the Hub. But it was very important now I look back, because I was accessing a place that had Black professionals that understood how to sort of support young Black people.
Yeah.
And I feel that for me was crucial at that point, because it was via that I learned, I kind of got deprogrammed, meaning that the sort of negative, the negative sort of mindset I developed through the education system over 16 years of being involved in it was reprogrammed to make you believe that you can achieve something. It was through the Hub I got my first job. And from that, I learned that, when I got my first job and I realized that I could actually do it, I just took it with both hands, and I never looked back. From when I got that job, I've never been unemployed. So that was very important.
And can you imagine then if there were no Hub?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. And it wasn't just,
which is what our kids have got now.
Yeah,
No
that's
Hub.
what I mean. It's interesting that, because that's when I think about that, that's scary. But it's not just that. If it wasn't just no Hub, but if it wasn't for certain practitioners that worked in the Hub at that time, then I don't know what. Because you can have the building, but it's about the workers in there. And, I know Benty understands this. There were some workers there that were very crucial. For me, especially.
Yeah. No, definitely. And it's interesting because on the other discussion what we had, the first Flix and Chat live, that came up as well, the kind of cultural teaching, the cultural education, what's missing now, what we probably benefited from. I'd say we probably were the last set of like young people as such who benefited from that, because shortly after that, all them places got kind of shut down and moved on to other things. So whether it were the Hub, whether it were Ellesmere Centre, so that could slow down momentum, and all these other different projects and things where young people benefited from.
Yeah, that was key for myself. Very important.
I think there's a few comments of people agreeing with what you were saying, Acha. And I think Tiana was saying that being only 21, there wasn't much youth clubs or anything for her growing up. Jamie's saying that cultural education is a key phrase. We are publishing a paper that the position is progressive, rational pedagogy developed with our
progressive relational pedagogy.
Yeah.
I was saying to Acha earlier on, it's I've been fortunate to publish a few papers in my career, yeah, but this one, I nearly come to tears when I read it, man. You know what I mean? Because it's a deep felt journal that describes our journey of developing a leadership program inside the university, and having done that, battling with the institutional structures and racism in order to get that program off the ground. It was successful. The impact speaks for itself. And we've been fortunate to sort of just theorize our methods of doing what we did and working with the students as partners to theorize that. And that, what we developed from that has informed staff development and an approach to race inclusion in institutions. So it's been published in the Cambridge University Press. Myself, Maxine Greaves, some of you may know Maxine, Johan Gilroy, and Manny Madriaga, who's he writes in that critical race theory domain. But it's an interesting one because my sort of domain specialism is in more information systems. But I work with different concepts, and we've combined interdisciplinary in this paper. So you're looking at social science, and then you're combining that with informatics. Anyway, it's going to be open access, so people can access it when it's gone through the final review today, and it'll be published hopefully this month or early next month.
Yeah.
But I'm sharing that paper amongst the networks because it tells a story, man. It really tells a story, I tell you.
Yeah, and it sounds like that you should get it on here and bring Jamie on to share that as well.
I was gonna say, Jamie, it sounds like when that paper publishes, we need to be having a chat, like interviewing you on this show.
Yeah, I'm more than happy, man.
If you wouldn't mind.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, that's the good thing about this. What we're trying to do, because it's bringing all this together into it. Because obviously, if we weren't having this, we wouldn't have known that these kind of things to tap into, and we can start utilizing it and bring it all together and sharing it with the wider public.
Yeah,
because it happens that there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's not that everybody might not be aware of what's happening within the community as well.
And educated minds is also what we need coming together. Like, don't get me wrong, we need everybody's mind coming together. But do you know what I mean? We need stand-up people to stand up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right. 1 second, Acha. Second question for you then. What inspired you to pursue a PhD in this topic? I think you kind of covered it briefly, but I don't know if you can go into that in a bit more depth.
Yeah. What inspired me? So when I did my undergraduate, I kind of picked up the bug of studying because it was in social political studies, and there were some really good modules that really sort of, and I just wanted to continue more. But there was a number of things. So that was one thing I wanted to continue studying, because I felt like I just started. I was, but there was a number of other things. And I think one of them was my son being born. When my son was born was 2008. And I don't know if you remember, during that period, there was a lot of shootings, murders within the Black community. And as time's gone on, during that time, I've seen younger people getting killed. And I was actually out, went to the barbershop one day, and an incident happened where a young person ended up getting stabbed and killed. And I remember, I never forget this. The boy was, it was on Aberdale Road, and it was some years ago now, but the guy who got stabbed, he was only, I think it was about 21, 19, something like that. It was in broad daylight, and he was laid next to where my car was. And when the paramedics come, it was a sunny day, and everybody come out, and the boy's mum come. And when the boy's mum come, I mean, that really hit home. And, you could see by the paramedics' reactions and the way the boy's face was that he was already dead. And I started to think, look, I see that journey now. When I explained to you that I got stabbed myself, I don't think that I was very high profile or at risk in terms of when I was 18, 19, like some of these other young people, but it still happened to me. But I believe in my journey that if my educational experience was different, I wouldn't have been where I was at that point. 5 years later, I really don't think I would have been there. And I personally think that that happens to a lot of young people, that they go through the education system and they leave not believing that that educational route is going to take them and let them achieve what they want to achieve. And they have all sorts of options out there, especially if they're living in certain communities and have access. So I remember thinking to myself, at the point, at that time when my son was born, I was young. I was working privately, working with kids who was at risk of exclusion. So I was still studying, I was working. And I did a training session for teachers. And they introduced me as the BAME specialist, right? That's how they introduced me. And I remember thinking to myself, that hit home because I thought, there's the problem. This shouldn't be a specialist thing. Yeah, it should be just standard procedure. Yeah, if I'm taking the spot as the specialist, and you know, at the time I think my son was only about 2, but in 10, 15 years time, when he's in secondary school, if the school that he's in needs a specialist, then he's had it. Nothing's going to change. So I started looking into it and thinking, well, I'm keeping up this space, but I need to understand that I'm coming into a school and I'm getting paid well and I'm working with a handful of kids. But what about everybody else? What about all the other kids? What about the other schools? So I wanted to study and understand the system in a broader sense, because it was things, the question I wanted to see is, I've worked on the front line for all that time. What's been happening above me that shapes what I was seeing on the ground? So what was happening above me that enabled me to actually go into the private sector, set up my own consultancy, get paid a lot of money and have loads of clients? What was happening? And if we don't address that, you know, for me, it's about taking that specialism out. You know, it can't be a specialism. So I wanted to understand that. And if I didn't understand that, then I couldn't challenge it. And that's one of the reasons why I did a doctorate in this particular area. And looking particularly at Black Caribbean males, we've been the most researched social group in the UK. Yeah, we have been researched to the high heels. And I think what's not being researched in the same sense is the wider system, the bigger system, the things that shape what we see on the ground. So that was what inspired me to sort of really do it. And, you know, it was them key things.
Okay. Thanks for that. Right, moving on to the next question for you then, Acha. What have you found, what during doing your research, what have you found from your research? So you've explained what inspired you to do it and what your concerns were, genuine concerns and obvious concerns for anybody who's, you know, can see what's going on. So you researched what you did, what did that lead you to find? What did that uncover?
Yeah, right. So like I said, I want to understand better what's happening on the ground. So my research title is, what is the links between disaffection and experiences in education? And what is happening above that shapes what we see on the ground, and how can we change it? Because it's not about just highlighting a problem. It's about looking at what can be the solutions, what are the solutions. So if I cut this answer down in 2, so when you're doing research, you have your secondary research, which is what, you know, you're reading what everybody else has done on this topic, and then you have your primary research, which you go out and do, and you interview people or you do questionnaires or whatever. You know, you do your own research to add to what's already out there. So if I start in terms of my secondary research, the things that I found was this, in terms of my research question. So if I talk about two main factors, two main key things. One is social inequalities, yeah, living in an uneven society, and the inequalities that are within that society, all the isms, sexism, racism, ageism, all these different isms that exist. And then there's the second part is educational reform. So basically how political parties have changed and structured the education system over the past how many years. So they're the two sort of things that stood out in terms of the secondary research. Especially when I'm looking at questions about what's the overarching thing. And the two key things out of that is being around inequalities have been there for years. They've not changed. They've been there for years. But one of the things that has ramped it up in terms of educational inequalities is the fact that the education system has been shifting to a right-wing sort of neoliberalism, capitalism structure. So if I sort of break that down for you, is that there's a number of things that happen in capitalism, and that institutions and companies sort of look for ways of creating and generating more wealth. Now, this might sound like it's off the topic, but it's very much on it, yeah? So they look for, so if, for instance, if you go to Tesco's or Asda right now, you'll have self-service machines. Those machines used to be somebody's job. Yeah, so that somebody was actually doing that role. But to make more money, you create this machine because now you don't have to pay that worker. Yeah. So that's what capitalism does. It looks for ways to increase its profit. So in another country, they might access the labor market over there, so they don't have to pay as much money to design our clothes and create our clothes. So most of our clothes are created in China and in Bangladesh because there's a labor market there where they can pay peanuts to. Yeah, so manufacturing. So that's what happens. So it becomes global. Yeah, neoliberalism is about removal of regulation and barriers to make them things happen. Yeah, so there might have been a regulation for me to move my company and manufacturing over into India, so I can instead of paying people £10 an hour, I could pay people 1 pence an hour. Yeah, but that regulation has gone through different policies and political leaders. So Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, so they really pushed neoliberalism. Now that's created what you call globalization, and it's created all these international, transnational companies. So there's no barriers to all these organizations. So you've seen that growth. Well, that's in business and economics. They've seemed to have implemented that. Well, they have implemented that within every social other area. So in terms of education, so education is become privatized. There's a global element to it. There's a competition element to it. And that is shifted. So what happens then is that you've got schools that are now sort of academies. So the academization program is the element of privatization. You've got globalization within education. So these are the things that's been coming at me. Secondary research is where you've got international league tables now, which every country's, Britain want to compete with China, who's doing well. So you've got an organization called the Program for International Student Assessment. Yeah, that creates the international league tables. That organization is run by a bigger organization called the Organization for Economic Cooperation.
Yeah.
So what it's tied to is the economic system, and that shapes the curriculum.
Yeah, yeah.
Because what countries are looking for is human capital. Yeah. So there's a real focus on education and human capital. What jobs are coming? What industries are coming in the future? And what do we need people to be doing? So it shapes everything. And then on the ground, like I said, you've got academization, and then you've got sort of a push for more standards and, you know, targets. And what happens then is that you've got pressure on schools and the system to meet this these targets. So in one hand, schools have got more freedom to do what they want because they're separate entities, but they're governed by policy, which is measured in league tables and Ofsted. League tables and Ofsted is a school's priority. Yeah, everything else is secondary. Yeah. So what does that mean? That means that you've got head teachers have got these freedoms, but they've got these restrictions at the same time. So even though I'm free to do it out what I want, I've got to make sure that my Ofsted and league tables, that's the priority, and everything else is secondary to that. Then they've had school cuts. So my question is then, what does that mean for what I'm talking about in terms of young people? Where's all the learning mentors gone? What was the learning mentors role? What's becoming seems to be increasing now is teaching assistants, because if you're in that system, what school needs is quiet classrooms. They don't need kids who's got additional problems or additional needs. So that's why you've seen the ramping up of exclusions amongst kids with special educational needs, because they don't meet this criteria, quiet classrooms. So learning mentors aren't needed now. What you need is teaching assistants. You need good teachers. Yeah. But you've got a system as well where the good teachers don't apply for bottom end schools at the league tables. They're applying for the top. And if there is good teachers in the bottom end, they're hard to keep. So it's a compounding effect.
Sorry to cut you, actually, I don't want to break your trail of thought as well, but you know, the academization.
Yeah.
Do you think it was it's just come to me really just now, because I remember years ago sitting in like a staff training day where the head teacher was explaining how the council's going to pull out of dealing with these schools, and it's going to be taken over by private companies and whatnot, who's going to be running them. So in my head at the time, I was thinking that sounds like privatization, but do you think it were intentionally done for them not to call it privatization? Because that's blatantly what it is.
It is what it is, but what you've seen, it's been a gradual process. So when academizations had various different stages, when academies came in at the initial thought, the agenda was to help underperforming schools in special measures.
Okay.
That was the intention.
Okay.
By the time we got to 2010 with a coalition government, academization was all about independent schools and, you know, schools having their own autonomy and removing the local authority.
Because academization was originally Labour, weren't it? What originally come up with that?
The Labour government, but their agenda was about underperforming schools.
Okay.
What the Conservative government did was looking at making all schools academies. I think there's only one secondary school in Sheffield that's not an academy. And that's
and they work on the primaries now, aren't they? They're starting to.
And can I just say that's how they always sneak things in as well, like over time. So first it starts off as this, and then it grows a little bit, and then it grows a little bit, and then we see the real monster manifest what you wanted from the beginning, which is capitalism and privatization, as you was rightly saying. But they can't come out the gate. Think about it. They can't come out the gate saying we want privatization and we want capitalism. So what they do is they come out the gate saying this is about helping and supporting schools that are in need. And then when they establish that, then they ramp it up a little bit until you do finally end up with the capitalization models. And there's so many examples of that in the system. Like, for one of the main examples is cars. Like they said that they've had the idea and the technology for self-driving cars a long time ago, but they know that the public's not going to accept it just like that. So what they've done is they've been doing it in increments. So first they introduced ABS brakes, where you got the robot helping you with the braking system. Then they introduced power steering, and then they introduced all these other things till virtually the car's driving itself now. But the whole point from the beginning was they want the car to drive itself. So, you know what I mean?
But the other thing as well is important to recognize, it's about political ideology. So some political parties will have this view. So the Labour government may have had this view on why the private are going down the academies route. and the Conservatives will have a certain view. So it's about political ideologies, the way political parties think, the way political parties view the education system, the way they see it, what it should be like. It's all about, that's a key part of it. So what a lot of the secondary research was highlighting is that this has contributed to a level of inequality. So partly answering the question that I'm asking in terms of my research is that you've seen a ramping up of school exclusions, but school exclusions in very different forms, not just in one form, not just in the traditional form of school exclusion. So like I've highlighted, quiet classrooms, kids out of school that have got the problems that need addressing, and they don't have the expertise in there to address them. The roles have gone. How many learning mentors exist now in schools? So what you're seeing in terms of various different forms of exclusion is you're seeing your general fixed period exclusions, you're seeing kids voting with their feet in terms of their attendance and not coming into school, you're seeing the ramping up of kids on APs, alternative provisions, you're seeing off-rolling, where schools are encouraging parents to take the kids off roll. You're seeing schools encouraging parents to do home ed, even if they've not got the skills, the resources to do it. You're seeing all these forms of exclusion happening, which seems to be ramped up. So if you give autonomy, freedom, but within this structure and these rules, it's creating these inequality outcomes. So, and it's not generally the middle class parents that are experiencing these different forms of exclusion. It's those that are in the working classes. Now, so this is creating a bit of a compounding effect. Now, what does that mean in my space? I'm not looking at all groups. I'm looking at Black Caribbean males. What that means is this is a bigger compounding effect because the racial inequality has always been there from the minute our parents came to this country. Yeah, it's just morphed in different forms. So it's not as overt now as it was probably when my oldest brother was in the education system, the time when Bernard Cord wrote that book. But there's things that haven't changed, because back then they had educationally subnormal schools. There was one in Sheffield. But now you've got PRUs, and there's a disproportionate amount of Black and ethnic minority kids in PRUs, pupil referral units. And if you look at the school to prison pipeline theory, pupil referral units play a major part in that sort of journey. So what you're seeing is that the more this has happened, this has increased. Now, does that mean this, that, you know, I was explaining, I got stabbed, I think 2021, but you're getting kids now shooting and killing 15, 16, because the quicker you're out the system and on the road, the quicker you're going to be at risk. So is that contributing to how we're seeing these groups that are facing inequalities experiencing severe disaffection a lot more younger? That's a question to ask. So that's what I picked up from my secondary research. Like I said, I narrowed it down after looking at the broader picture by looking at just the Black experience within education. And the Black experience in education, like I said, hasn't changed. It's been like this since we came, since our parents, since the Windrush generation. It's not something that's it's been there all the time. We've just managed to survive it and progress. Things have, don't get me wrong, things have improved in some ways, but some things are still the same. Yeah. Now, when I looked at my primary research, because all that information shaped the questions that I asked, I looked at different categories of people. So one of the things I found from my research and reading all this stuff, there wasn't enough Black male voices. There wasn't enough there was a lot of people researching about black males, but there wasn't enough voices of black males within that research. So one of the things I wanted to do is speak to black males. Yeah, I spoke to everyone, don't get me wrong, but I focus on black males, but black males in professional roles within education. Yeah. So I started by looking at first generation black males that I knew in Sheffield that worked in the education system and might have retired, so 60 plus. So I spoke to a number of people who worked in senior roles in the local authority, in youth services, and all these different organizations. Many people, guys, you already know. Yeah. And it was interesting listening to their story and listening to what they saw about this issue. So one of the things I found was that this hasn't been nothing that's changed. But I also found that there was an element of what you call a struggle around agency. So what I mean by agency is the individual's ability to change something. Many of those black males in those roles, when they got those senior roles, felt powerless to change things. Because even though they got the role, they was in a position, the structures around them, you know, prevented them from actually making real change. Yeah. So that was one thing that stood out. And it was in, and what was also interesting, I then spoke to sort of second and third generation black males who are working in education in senior leadership, in leadership roles. And it was a similar story. Yeah, there were similar things that came out. So that hasn't changed. So is it the roles that we get? It's not. It's the structures that we're working in. There's a saying that somebody said to me the other day, structures make good people do bad things. And that was very interesting because I interviewed a woman, a white woman who has been, you know, she's retired, but she set up many projects in the community. She was heavily involved originally in the hub. And one of the things she said, and she felt like, is that the first generation of those that got into positions of power, when they got there, they threw in the towel. So they might have been radical outside of that, but when they got into the system, that element of radicalism went. And I kind of picked up that indirectly by some of the responses from the interview. So some people said, when they look back now on the career, they wish they did more.
Well, you're saying that's partly due to the strains of working within the structures of what's set up already.
It is, but it's partly also to do with the individual.
Right.
So I know a man in Huddersfield, and he's been in that, but he's not changed. And that's why he's not in the system. And when I worked over there, I heard and saw how the councillors was very scared of him.
Yeah, and people like Gus John and that.
Yeah. People like Bernard Cord and these people, they didn't go into the system. They had things to lose as well, but they didn't. You know what I mean? It's a
deep thing.
It's a very deep thing, but that's one thing that I kind of picked that came out. The other thing was also speaking to teachers, black, white, all teachers, yeah, regardless. And when I spoke to white teachers about this issue, they could recognize that there's a problem, but they didn't know exactly what it was. So there wasn't denying that there wasn't an issue. And some felt very uncomfortable with the questions. Yeah. Even though I sent the questions before the actual interviews or the focus group, some felt very uncomfortable. So I had to kind of steer some of my focus groups where I purposely separated white teachers and black teachers because I didn't want sort of, you know, I wanted them to feel comfortable, to be honest. Yeah. And it was interesting that they came out. So there was speaking with black teachers, white teachers about this subject. in focus groups and just in general through my role. Interesting things come out. Speaking with people in the local authority as well, I work in the inclusion and attendance service, and I did a presentation on this particular subject in Sheffield, looking at the school to prison pipeline, looking at the disproportionate amount of young people in primary schools, secondary schools that are getting excluded, looking at the youth justice service, looking at the children in custody, looking at the NEET population in Sheffield, right? And looking at the figures in terms of how much Black people of colour make up, children of colour make up of the overall population compared to these figures. And it's scary when you see it, yeah? But that led to a real conversation amongst our service and staff. And those things that came out that there was honest about, because the picture's right in front of them, the data doesn't lie. But what was interesting is that they struggled to actually feel that they could contribute to any positive change. So what I found them speaking to white teachers is they know there's a problem, but they've not been equipped to have the skills to start saying, hang about, challenge it or change even practice. They've got no clue. Absolutely no clue. One of the things I found from that is what David Gilbourne, who is a guy you should read about, he's a professor at Birmingham. He says that it's because over the past 20, 30 years, race has been gradually pulled out of policy.
Okay.
A colorblind approach. So if you look at inclusion, race is a small footnote. These all the diversity, BAME, the term BAME. So the term BAME's not actually, it actually camouflages a lot of the inequalities that goes on. So for instance, moving on to the next category of people I interviewed was leadership. So I interviewed 2 former head teachers, yeah, that was head teachers in Sheffield, who retired. One was a head teacher, been in places Nottingham, Birmingham, Coventry, and he was in Sheffield when he retired. And another used to be the head teacher at Fir Vale, which is a book wrote about him. And it was interested in listening to their, because they've got experience and knowledge. When I asked one of them, I asked, when you look at Black boys in the education system, what are their biggest challenges? And he shocked me what he said. He said, teachers are scared of them, yeah? So the fear that teachers have over Black boys. His second challenge was their lack of expectation in their academic ability.
Right.
If a Black boy does well, some teachers can be surprised because the expectation, because they're the biggest challenges. And I said, how do you know that? What makes you say that? And he talked about overuse of disciplinaries. So if a teacher's scared of a pupil, they feel like they have to overload them with sanctions to show them who's boss or put them in place or
control. Yeah.
It's about control. And he says he knows that they don't even realize they're doing it. And because it's
unconscious.
It's unconscious. So because the only way that they could pull it out is if 2 kids did the exact same act at the same time and they reacted this way and they reacted, but other than that, they can't see it.
And so, and not to pull your point off your trail of thought again, but that kind of reflects in society in general, doesn't it?
It does. That's a broader discussion, but that's the thing that that's the thing from his experiences seen in the classrooms and within the schools. Now that leads on to some of Gilbourne's things, because what's interesting, if you look at those 2 factors that head teacher highlighted, behavior and attainment, and then we look through the lens of special educational needs, you might have some children who may have ADHD, yeah? You might have some children who are dyslexic. But if a child's got ADHD and he reacts very lively, and he's triggered by that, what this head teacher's saying, that might get missed because they might already view him as aggressive. If he's got special education needs like dyslexia, that might be missed because there's already a low expectation on his academic ability. So that's expected. And that's interesting. If you look at a lot of prisoners, and it's not all prisoners, you find that many of them find out that they've got special educational needs while they're in prison. Many Black people have found out they've got special educational needs later on in life. I found out that I've got special educational needs in my 30s and 40s.
And it's funny you said that, you know, because I was going to ask you earlier, have you found in your research, because you mentioned PRUs, have you found that a lot of Black young people end up in PRUs as opposed to SEMH schools where you need a statement and stuff like that? And you've kind of answered my question really, because if they're getting missed for ADHD or other diagnosis, then they're not going to get the statement to get into SEMH school. So that's why they end up more towards the PRUs where it's like a risk of exclusion and stuff like that.
Yeah, but if they've already developed a mentality, the young people, of me against them, meaning me against the system, me against the teachers,
yeah,
I've been an overusage of sanctions, or the young person might come into school with a certain attitude. Look, we know some of these young people, they ain't angels. We got to remember that. And they might have come into school with a certain attitude. But do you know something? That's young people. Yeah, that's young people. Young people do react like that because they're young. That's part of the that's part of the process. And interesting enough, I think that's recognized amongst different groups, but for some reason, there's a challenge when it comes to Black boys. What Gilborn talks about is the stereotypes. He believes the stereotypes are a real challenge, because the example is an example he gives of the what you call the model minorities. He describes them as the model minorities, which he refers to as the Indian and the Chinese. Yeah. Because the stereotypes that follow them in school benefit them within the education system. Yeah. That, you know, they believe that they're going to do well at this, but the stereotypes that follow Black boys are things that go against them within the education system in various different ways.
Can I ask you a question though, actually, before you move on?
I was going to say, do you know what? Because let's get through the questions and we have Q&A after.
All right then.
Yeah. So that was coming from, and then I also interviewed sort of leadership, so deputy heads, assistant heads, people at that level. And what was really worrying was one person I interviewed. She retired many years ago, and she's been a deputy head for many years. Because when I was working in schools, she was a deputy head for many years. And I asked similar questions, but one question I asked is, over your career, what training have you had around race, anti-racist practice within education? And she actually said it was the only training that she had was what I delivered in that school. And that's, you know, she became a teacher in the sort of late 70s. And the only thing that she could really highlight as something that was beneficial in relation to developing understanding of anti-racist practice in education was when an organization was around called SUMAS. There was a SUMAS was an organization that developed Black and other minoritized teachers who went and worked in schools. And she said, by working alongside sort of teachers from different racial ethnic backgrounds, she developed a lot of knowledge in that space. So, but that was it. So you're getting, there's no sort of knowledge. Now, so I also interviewed social workers and youth work practitioners as well. But here where I think a lot of the rich data came out is when I interviewed sort of what I call Black males are defined as tier 3 and also Black males that were tier 2. And these was Black males who went to school in Sheffield. After leaving school, spent a period of time disaffected. So they might have, you know, been on the road, gone to jail, you know, whatever, but have had years out of that process, you know, so some have progressed on, yeah? The majority have progressed on, so they've experienced the school system, they experienced disaffection, but they're now professionals working in a career and have got like a 10-year plus track record behind them. So it was really interesting because they could look back and see that journey of what led into that, but also how they came out of it. Yeah. They came from various different backgrounds. There were some people I interviewed that I never knew grew up in care. Some came from single parent households in a sort of poor, Burngreave or Broom Hall. Some, came from Fullwood, Huntersbourne, all over the area. So we had a cross section in terms of social class. Yeah, so there was people from poorer working class backgrounds and people from middle class backgrounds and people from just the working class, in the middle. And it was interesting because all their experiences in terms of the education system was identical. So there was not much difference between the person who grew up in care from the person who grew up in a poor community, in a one-parent household, from the person who grew up in a middle-class community, and their experiences in the education system. There was no difference, which was really interesting. Because if you look at sort of white children in middle class in Silverdale and look at white children in a place school like Chaucer, their experiences in the education system are different because of class.
Yeah.
And what Gilbourne highlights in his book, The Colour of Class, he highlights that the element of social class benefits, white people, and it disadvantages white people if they're from a lower class background. But it doesn't really have that much benefit for black families, because in that book he interviewed 100 black middle class parents, accountants, lawyers. Some put the kids in private school, had to pull them out. And he found that the element of class, the only benefit it actually did, it just was that the parents was able to challenge the system, and they might have had the resources. But the fact that they had to challenge the system was part of it highlighted that their class advantages didn't really give them that much, and didn't give their kids that much advantage. Now, I saw that in some of the interviews when I spoke to parents, black middle class parents. I spoke to a woman over at Kirklees who set up a Saturday school, and she had to challenge the school about the set that her daughter was put in. And when she eventually got a starter in the high sets, the daughter got A stars. Some people in the interview, there was one guy who had a parent that was working in the education system from a middle class background who managed to do the same thing. But the fact that they had to challenge the school because the expectations was sort of low, highlighted that it didn't, the class element didn't really benefit their children in any sort of way. And that's what came out of the interviews. What also was interesting coming out of the interviews was when speaking to everybody, was asking what contributed to your ending up disaffected, ending up on the road, ending up going to jail. How much did school contribute to that? How much did community that you lived in contribute to that? And how much did parenting contribute to that? And some highlighted, parent. So they might have seen things that they believed that they wouldn't have let their children see. So they believe that it was interesting. Some people actually highlighted that the community that they lived in, because the role models that they had contributed heavily. But everybody unanimously said, majority of people, anyway, there's only one or two people that said differently, that the education system played a part because the way that the things that they saw within the education system. Now, the second set of males I interviewed was people that I knew grew up in those poor areas who had single parent families. So they grew up in Pittsmore or Broom Hall. And they also lived in them same communities, side by side, saw everything. But they didn't go down the disaffected route. They didn't go to prison. They didn't get involved in crime. They kind of went from school, had the similar experience and excelled. Yeah. And it was interesting listening to their conversation. I spoke to two people. they grew up in the same block of flats on Pitsmoor. One believed that his community, if he, don't matter what school he went to, because he grew up in Pitsmoor, he was always going to end up where he ended up because of what he saw. The other person actually saw growing up in Pitsmoor was what prevented him going down there. So he found his community as a savior. And it was interesting, the things he highlighted. One person highlighted Catherine and the front line. The other person highlighted Byron Records, Sadaka, Ellesmere, you know, all these different things. So the group in the same area, but they saw the different, they looked at different things.
Mm.
Yeah, and that was really, really interesting. But it was, without a shadow of a doubt, education, and when you're speaking to individual people, played a part. And what also was interesting is that the comments what the head teacher made, who experienced working in all these different places, in various ways came out. One interesting thing come out was I was interviewing somebody who was mixed race, and he had a white older brother. And he, you know, from what he said, they both went to the same secondary school, and he developed the badness and the traits because of his older white brother, who was a few years older than him. And what made him recognize race was because his older white brother never got excluded, but he got moved on to another school. And they both went to sort of a top performing school, but they both were behaving badly. He got kept on in the school and he was excluded. And he started to question things around race at that point, which was really interesting because a parent actually said that to me. A white parent said they've had a white child go to the same school, behave in similar ways, but they found that their child who was mixed race, they got a lot, it was harder to deal with. They faced a lot more challenges. There was called to the school more. There was more, they had to fight for the child a lot more.
Yeah.
And it was only then they recognized these things. So these are things that are all coming out. Now, here's the question is that looking at this top tier thing, what are my findings? What, you know, what, because I think the next question you're going to ask, Bent, is, so what are the solutions from this?
Yeah, that's the next question what we're coming up to. We'll just present it to you. What suggestions for change do you have as a result of your research? So obviously you've expressed that you've discovered a lot of stuff there in your studies. So what kind of suggestions have you got for change moving forward?
Right. Change is always going to happen, yeah? So I've talked about all these big micro things, international league tables, academization, you know, this, that. That's going to happen regardless if we like it or not, yeah? Mm. It's like, I look at, and if you look at business, you know, do you remember Blockbuster?
The video, VHS, yeah.
Where are they now? Yeah? Netflix come along, right? Yeah. Do you remember just city taxis? Uber come along, yeah? Uber was running illegally until, you know, when it comes to regulation, they thought, well, this is a good idea. And now that, you know, things move, yeah? You know, you remember MySpace? Facebook come along, yeah? These things.
Napster.
Yeah, it's like, and that's the education system. Whatever happens in society is going to move on.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think he's not moved on?
But here's the thing. The answer one of the conclusions I've come to is what I've experienced. You know, why am I sat here now talking to you guys? Because I've done a doctorate. If I take things away and I look at that, is two things: is parents, my parents. However, they could only that parenting would only take me so far in this system, but it was enough to not let me get too far deep and, you know, become down the road disaffected. It was enough for me to be at school and never get excluded.
Yeah.
But I also look at places like the Hub. The Hub is where I learned about Bernard Cord. Yeah. one of my solutions, I think, is to this, what you guys are doing. You've got to go back to the community. I think you highlighted something, Bente, and it came out in one of the interviews. When I asked, there's a couple of questions I asked everyone. One was, do you think it's getting better, this situation, or do you think it's getting worse? And unanimously, everybody said it's getting worse.
Okay.
I asked somebody in the interview, why do you think it's getting worse? And one person said, because of us. I goes, what do you mean? It goes, like our generation, and Bente, you highlighted something. We were the last generation to experience Black community practitioners. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the hub shut down, Ellesmere shut down, all these places shut down, funding was taken away. What did we do? We went straight into our jobs with all that cultural benefit that we got and forgot about the generation coming through. We forgot about them. I was working with a young person who's now in custody for a shooting. And when I first got to this young person, he was running out the back door and chipping. And eventually I catched up with him. And when I talked to him and he realized I was real, he gave me his number. We started meeting up. Yeah. I'm supporting this young person. He's not been to school for how many months. He's out doing his thing. And then when I was meeting him, I could see he's telling me all the things I want to hear. Yeah, boom, boom, tick that box. I'll say that, I'll say this. And then one day he just suddenly turned around to me and said, what you're telling me is bullshit. I said, what do you mean? He goes, you look around you right now. Black people that are either getting stabbed, shot, they're not getting no jobs. Everything's against Black people. I goes, what do you, and he starts explaining it. He goes, school was like that. This is like that. Everybody out the road, it's like this. That's all it is. I goes, what about me? I'm working. I've got a job. Do you know what he said to me? He goes, you're just a lucky one. Now, the reason why he thinks that, Bente, is because he didn't know all of us. He hadn't seen all of us.
Yeah, I get your point, yeah.
We went to the hub and we saw Colvin, we saw Cold Case, we saw all these different people. We saw Des Smith. We knew Des Smith was a guy, barrister in court. We knew all these different people. We know Dave Campbell, we know this, we know that, because they formed the community that was around us. They showed themselves.
We've kind of got sucked off into isolation, haven't we?
We've just gone for the paper, the book, to pay our bills and forget their individualism.
Yo, I just hope everybody recognizes, yeah, that Jonathan's saying some seriously powerful, deep stuff here. Like this is serious stuff.
It's the truth.
No, it's the truth. Listen, but it's very serious what you're saying here, bro.
Here's the thing, yeah. Right now, I'm seeing what's happening, and it came out in one of my interviews to the Roma Slovak community in the education system. But you know the thing, what's the challenge that they have? They don't have people in services, accountants, lawyers. So Bernard Cord, what was it? He wasn't a teacher. It was work part-time, but he came to here to study what? Economics. And it sounds like from the documentary that it was in a blues at the time, and a parent just looked at him and said, yo, you working in this system, what you think about what's going on here? And before he knew it, all these parents around him in his club. But he had the knowledge and education to go and do the research. And then how did he get the book published? It was a Black bookshop that's still around today. And then they all came together, brought the audience and the parents and the community, and he shared his findings like I'm doing right now with you. That led to the bookshop guy and the publisher saying, look, we need to write a book, get this published. They did that, and it went all over the country. The government got a whiff of it. They brought him on national TV, but they brought him there to try and discredit him. But guess how he annihilated him? It just says everything I've put in the book is come from your data. That led to the closing down of all the schools. But that was the community element of it. We've forgot, if that community, if that infrastructure was not there, he wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying what you're saying is very important, because ultimately what you're saying, you've said three things there throughout the journey of the conversation. You basically highlighted the importance of parenting, because you said yourself that parenting saved you up to a point, like it stopped you from going so far. So parenting is clearly very important in this journey. Then you've said community is very important, because obviously someone could be getting good parenting, but if they're going out into a community that's filled with a lot of bad role models, as you say, then the parenting's only going to go so far, which brings us back to it takes a village to raise children, because obviously it's all of our responsibilities. It's not just the parents' responsibility for that child. And then the third one you've said, which is education and people's experiences within the education system, which I think most Black people at some level can see and agree with what you're saying. So we marry all that together and compound it. It's like the bottom line is we need to be looking after each other a lot better.
Yeah, and I tell you another thing as well, like you highlighted there, I had two good parents at home, but it didn't stop both my brothers from ending up in jail. And it didn't stop me from ending up nearly there. Or just imagine if that stabbing that I got was fatal, right? There's many young people, I know one young people dead, two church-going parents.
Yeah.
It doesn't,
and I know that, yeah.
It doesn't, because there's more. There's the wider society. It's the system. And our parents at that point, they didn't know they didn't understand the system like we do now. They didn't. So it's not a blame on the parents. It's not like it would only go so far. There's a wider thing. But here's the other thing I found out from the research.
Yeah.
Many of these teachers, head teachers, white teachers, that understand that there's a problem, but they don't know what to do. But guess what? What did the deputy head I spoke to only says that they only experienced training from myself. But she said by working alongside SUMAS workers, that was a Black organization that was educated Black. So for instance, who came from SUMAS? The head teacher at King Edward's, Linda Gooden, Dr. Sharon Curtis, who's, I think it's Ellesmere Nursery. Yeah. They all came out of SUMAS, because it's not just having the Black teachers, it's having educated on cultural and history Black teachers. Because I know a lot of Black people that did not know nothing about Bernard Cord. Right? So it's about having that element, but that's a community that comes from the community. So what can a community organization do? There's a missing gap. You can be working with schools and teachers and educators to empower them, because there is teachers that want to learn, but they don't know where to go. So if you had things, some of these community organizations there's an article by, have you heard of the Dr. Kindry Hendry at Birmingham University?
I've not personally, no.
He's a Black guy from Birmingham. He's on TV a lot about, he does a lot of stuff. But he spoke about he said this, if he's still at the university, he's got an article in The Guardian, I'll share it with everyone, but he says, if he's still at the university, he's been at university like 15 years, but if he's still at the university over the next 5 years, that means he's sold out. That's what he said, because he needs to go back to the community. And I think there needs to be community initiatives to really make a difference. There will still be problems, but they seem to have got worse.
But I want to make it clear what you're saying there, actually, in regards to the educators, whether it be Black or white educators. Obviously, a lot of the educators are majority white. You're saying that they have a responsibility to improve the situation, but a lot of the learning what they need is to come from us, where to kind of educate them on the issues what they need to tackle.
Well,
so like consultancy kind of thing, really.
Well, this is the thing. I don't know where the learning needs to come from, but what I do know is this. Many of these white professionals might be a head of a service, director, head teacher, right? But you ask them about anti-racist practice, they've got no idea whatsoever.
Yeah.
They think it's just a policy that says we don't tolerate racist language. So they end up excluding the black boy because
he
said the word. That's how that's that's it. But in terms of implementing and embedding it, they don't get it, right? But why is that? It goes back to what Gilborn says. Anti-racist policy is being removed from the from anti-racism has been removed from policy over the past how many years? Yeah, it's been removed. So for that head teacher, if you think of a professional, a head teacher, a director, and you think of their journey over the past 20 years to get to that position, how much knowledge have they had to acquire on anti-racist practice in order to get into the positions that they're in? If you look at any leadership and ask how much education have you had to acquire on anti-racist practice in order for you to get in your position? None. So that's like me getting a job that's around special educational needs, and I've got no knowledge of it whatsoever. Because remember, you've got to understand, racism kind of comes up now and again.
Yeah.
It's not a thing it's like Stephen Lawrence.
It's a bit topical, isn't it? Like
Brixton Riots.
George Floyd. Can I say, would it be a case of like, I look at it like this. Sometimes you get what you accept. So sometimes people only treat you like a doormat because you act like a doormat. So I'm saying if black people were to say, look, enough is enough, and we as a community and as a people start saying, look, the way you're treating our young people in schools and this and that, would that force the agenda for them to have to train people?
I think the only thing that will force the agenda is if you can highlight that. Remember what Cord did? Cord highlighted it. He presented it. You gotta be Look, not all anti-racist practice is good. There's some people that have the best hearts in the world. They want to make a change, but have not educated themselves on the system. They've not educated themselves on the components that are, it's a multi-dimensional thing. So they become more of a problem than a solution. You have to be educated. You've got to get educated on the issues that you're trying to challenge. And I think many a times, some organizations, and I'm just saying organizations in general, might be passionate about a subject, but don't acquire the right level of education to make real change, right? Because change isn't just come by just something that's written or something that somebody says. It's about consistent, progressive, sustainable change. So look, we had the McPherson report, which it seems like the government, this current government, are doing everything in its power to try and pull back. So what did the McPherson report after Stephen Lawrence murder, what were the findings? The findings was that there's institutions in Britain are institutionally racist. That's the term, institutionally racist. Yeah. But what has happened? So that was the findings. But what has happened since then? There's been really no change. So it just seems to be a policy thing. And let's get one thing straight. And maybe us ourselves, we might not be as active, and these organizations right now might not be active if George Floyd and the COVID pandemic didn't take place. What you've got to look at, there's two global things that took place at the same time that highlighted race. One was watching a man get murdered by law enforcement for 8 minutes, where the man's screaming for his mom in broad daylight. What more do you need? Even the Ku Klux Klan looked at that and thought, wow, you're taking it to the next level there, right? And you even had people, questioning, well, is it murder or, I heard that come from a professional. It's not said as murder yet, right? And then you had a global pandemic that highlighted, that shone a spotlight on inequalities, because to socially isolate, you've got to have space. But if majority of your people are in blocks of flats, it's harder to self-isolate, isn't it? If you're working in a job where, and I don't know if you know this about what happened at the NHS, a lot of white nurses refused to go into those wards. So there was, how they were sent, they sent a lot of black workers in there. That's why the numbers went up.
And that's kind of similar to the Windrush situation, but it was the war what brought the Windrush.
Yeah, so this has been, you know, these things that have shone a spotlight on it, but it's not new. One of the things I found in my research, and Cord mentions it in his book, in 1961, after the Windrush generation settled, the government did some research on the Windrush generation to see how they settled. And it was some LGB Rose, yeah? And they've written a book about it. I've got a book here called The Colour of Citizenship. And they did research on the Windrush generation from 1961 to 1969. And their findings said that if the inequalities continue for the Windrush generation in housing, in education, in employment, and in health, that in Britain, you'll have black ghettos by the year 2000, like the US. We saw front lines in the 80s. So this isn't new. It's been going, it's a historic thing, yeah? But what you've got to remember is this. What did our parents do? My dad came here with no education, yeah? They threw Pordner, they did this. That's how they bought the house. In 2007, my dad ended up building a mansion in Jamaica, which was his dream. You know what I mean? So I see an example of struggle and how you can overcome. But they formed the community. They formed it around the churches. They formed it around whatever. They formed the community, and they worked together. They had, when it comes to overt race, we've never seen, they had it a million times harder than us. But there were some benefits that they had at the same time. Don't get me wrong.
So,
you know something, it's interesting because before you join the live, I'd like just briefly outlined again to people what Unity Project's about and what they're trying to achieve. And without even interacting with you, and so to make it known to the public, it's not staged. You're coming up with the same conclusion of what Unity Project's about, really, bringing the community together so we can move forward.
Yeah, we brought Jonathan in for the education side of it. So like you were saying, people need to be educated. And that's why we're having this video and why we're putting this recording out to the community so that people can actually see the facts and know that we're not just chatting and ranting about rubbish. Yeah. And also, like, the problem is if you check everybody in the group, what's in here now, yeah, the problem kind of is like we were saying with the parenting, most people are concentrating on their own parenting, and they're thinking like, as long as I've got my parent and my kids in check, then I'm good. I've done my job. But like you said, the guy at the barbershop or the guy in town the other day could be any one of our children very, very easily. The only reason why...
You know what, Kevin? I can remember a long time ago when I first started getting into working with young people in education and stuff like that. And I remember saying to even myself then, because I was only a young person myself, but practically at that time, that if I become like successful in the work what I'm doing, that's if I'm just thinking about myself, that's just my success. Well, then when I have my children and whatnot, and my younger family, next generation, when they get re-entered back into the community, if nothing's changed, then they still got that high percentage chance of falling down the wrong road, like we've been discussing.
They have, but what does change is this: the examples that you see. Yeah, but the examples start within the four walls of your own home. Yeah, that is very important. Yeah, examples start in four walls of your own home. But it's then to go out into the wider society. And then it's about what their experiences are within institutions like schools or the community. How does that shape their thinking? The peer group, how does that shape their thinking?
And within yourself, actually, as well, even with your own children, when you, like early years, when they're at home, they've got a certain attitude and behavior. As soon as they start going to school and mixing with wider circles, they're going to pick up certain things, positive or negative, and that, you know what I mean?
But the key is that by the time they get there, they already know right from wrong.
Yeah.
That's the
And
key.
plus-
So when I was saying about when I was at school and I had a lot of bad friends that were doing a lot of things and I'd still be involved with them, but I knew that, hey, that line, you go in there, Tom, you can tell your mum to F off. I can't, so I'm not going to go there. Yeah. So when you tell that teacher to F off, that's when I need to get out of the picture so the teachers doesn't think we're both on that tip. Why? Because when I left the house, I knew right from wrong.
Yeah.
And that's very important. However, I want to make this clear. There's many kids that know right from wrong, and the parenting is not the real underlying issue. It's the experiences that they're having within the education system. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. You know, I used to hear kids say, my mum don't talk to me like that. Yeah. When you hear that, that's a concern, right? Because what they're saying there is, because I can chat to my mum anyway, teacher's got no chance, right? However, there's many kids going to the system that aren't that inclined like that. You know, don't seem to think. Let me just finish, Bente.
Yeah.
Don't seem to think we've got this profile of kids getting excluded, especially amongst Black and ethnic minority communities, that they're coming from bad homes. Yeah, they're getting, you know, they've got parents. No, that's not that's not all the case. Especially if you look at, you know, over the generations, it's not always the case. Yeah, our parent, you know, the generation that I interviewed, the majority of them had church-going parents,
hardworking people. And
why did Bernard? What happened after the Bernard Cord involved that opened that scandal? They set up Saturday schools. So the idea of Black communities not valuing education is a load of garbage. We've got a history of that. Yeah. So every group's challenges and struggles is specific for that group, and you've got to look at the history of it. But what I would conclude with is this: the communities need to form a supplementary, like CORD did, like they did. You've got to have some sort of supplementary community element, like the hub did for us. The hub provided supplementary, but there also has to be support for some of those schools, but that support also has to come with an element of challenging as well. Yeah, because there's a system in place that might just do something at a crisis moment, but when that crisis moment is over, that agenda's no longer an issue.
Yeah,
I think that's one of the problems that have continued this challenge and perpetuated. So I think there needs to constantly be supplementary stuff for our community.
Yeah.
Support the education system when needed, and to challenge the education system when needed. Yeah. If it's just about cutting the education system down, never going to work. Yeah, that's the problem. It's about, so you have to develop the education in order to do those two things: support and challenge, and sometimes hold to account.
Yeah.
And replace and fill the gaps as well, where
that's the support
education
element.
system. Well, it's not supporting you, filling in the gaps.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, like, can we just say one of the main conclusions is that we do need to. It is vitally important that we come together as a community more, and that we start meeting up like this more and meeting up in other ways more, because I sometimes I think, like, again, we were taught to socialize back in the day. Like, my parents used to take me places. I was introduced to the community. I felt a part of the community. Like you said, now these kids ain't got that. They don't see nobody. And I think it makes it easier for certain things to happen when nobody doesn't know nobody, and when we're all strangers, and you know, like you said, the example starts at home. Yeah. So if your kids don't see you interacting or socializing with people, like, I remember my parents, because they used to talk to respect to other people, that made me talk to those people with respect, because I know my mom talks to you with respect, so I definitely got to talk to you with respect, else I'm in big trouble. But if they don't see you talking to anybody, all they see is going to work and coming back, and you might go to grandma's, and you might go to mom's house, and that's it. Then
That's
it's
all
like,
they know.
yeah, then you're not really. So it's vital for many, many reasons that we need to meet up. You need to bring your kids along. Your kids need to know each other. We need to know each other. They need to see us meeting.
And that's why. That's what I was saying the other day, and I don't mind mentioning dropping names as well. And I even said it to him the other day. That's why I have a lot of respect for Infrared, Michael Redhead, because when I look at it at the moment, to be honest, the amount what he's doing within the community, he's filling a lot of that gap by the stuff what he's doing. For example, like the Caribbean Football Club, when you go there, you see people who you might have grown up with bring their kids who you don't necessarily link with on a day, on a basis you rarely see. But with that access to that sports club, you're getting to see them every week. So your kids are getting to see their kids every week. So that, whether it's subconsciously or consciously, is building a community. And there's a lot more what he does as well. So once again, I have to shout out to Infa with the way what he's doing to make improvements in the community.
Yeah.
But yeah, Acha, thanks for that conclusion and everything what you've said. It's been very informative and useful, and just reassuring as well, listening to what you're saying and what your findings are and what your suggestions are. It kind of gives me the feeling that we are working on the right tracks. Obviously, like I said earlier, it's a process and it takes a long time, but we are working along the right tracks to build back, because we've had it before. We never got, we didn't get the full 100 of it, but I did have momentum before. We had things in place and it kind of got let go.
But Benton, the most important thing is that me and you, we benefited from it.
Yeah.
We was beneficiaries of the hub.
Yeah.
If the hub wasn't there, the hoods wouldn't have existed. We wouldn't have ended up on Radio 1. We wouldn't have traveled the country doing all those things.
Mm.
We wouldn't have ended up, we all end up at Black Palm. We wouldn't have had all that. If you think of that, my first job was in the place that I was always going, the youth center.
Yeah.
The kid, we had so much that what we benefit from. So I don't think it's that difficult, because we've seen it and we've been through that process. Look at everybody in the hoods, what they're doing now.
Yeah.
That's the benefit. That's because of the hub.
The hub and the hoods
and that's project. Why we need one for our kids. We need a hub now for our kids. It's very simple, and we are the ones that have to come together and make it happen, because it's not going to just grow out of the ground, is it?
No,
by
itself. It has to be.
It's not.
It has to be a decade. You have to look at, and what you've got to do, I personally think now, is that whatever plans, whether it's working in the council or whatever you're doing in the community, looking at this particular issue, you've got to think in decades, not years. You've got to think the next 10 years.
10 years.
You've got to think of the next 10 years, because, how long did we spend interacting at the hub? I know Colvin chaired our meetings for 5 years. 5 years he was in with our chairing our meetings.
Boy, another reason
I think why things such as this are good as well, because like you said earlier, we can source skills within the community. So like you said, other professionals, other skilled people, and other people with useful inputs. You can source them through doing things like what we're doing now. Whereas at the moment, the skills and stuff are out there, but it's all scattered all over. So
it's not coming together.
Yeah. So unity again is the key word. I know it might sound corny to some people and whatnot, but unity is the key word, isn't it? End of the day.
But is anybody else in the live got any questions? Because I know some.
Yeah, we're just going to say, we can open up questions now.
Yeah, man, I've got some comments and questions. Firstly, respect due to Unaman for putting this on. To be honest, it was some months back, Kevin, when I seen your video on, I think it was this project, talking about what the sort of, the aims and whatnot is, and respect where it's due, because it does take the community to come together. There is lots of different pockets of things happening, but it's in silos and nobody knows what's going on. I think a lot of things that Acha said, I mean, to be quite upfront, you know, Atcha's kind of mentored me for the last 3 years in regards to the race space. You know what I mean? Because whilst obviously man's had a bit of experience in terms of, you know, but I've come a long way. I'm gonna tell you now, I've accelerated to a point where I'm publishing papers in this space, and I've done projects, not really knowing the sort of social side of things in the science, but you know, for me, it's clicked. And he'll tell you for the last 3 years, I've progressed in terms of my understanding of this space, and I've brought my specialism into this domain, which you don't see actually. And I'm talking about strategy and how that gets executed throughout the organization. Now, along that journey, some of the things that he's saying I resonate with, but I want to add to them as well, because yes, race has been pushed to the bottom of the card, number one. Right now, it's not about race, it's about EDI. Yeah, we're talking about institutions and public agenda, it's about EDI. So whilst there's still a glimmer of hope in terms of creating change within institutions.
Sorry, just explain what you mean by EDI, because not everyone might know what you mean by that.
Sorry, equality, diversity, and inclusion. Yeah. So LGBTQ, disability, gender. Yeah, race is there, but we're not really sort of, you know, pushing that one. When you're talking about equality, when you're dealing with public institutions, they're not looking at race solely, they're looking at EDI. So if you want to try and make change in the public sector, you have to come under the EDI umbrella. You can't just come with a race thing, because they'll shoot you down straight and say, well, what about the LGBTQT? And, you know, so you got to be moved tactfully. I'm saying that from experience, number one. Secondly, remember, institutions have their structures in place for a reason. They've maintained the system of what we're seeing today for cycles and cycles and cycles. It's reproduced what we're seeing today over decades, yeah? Now, what I've learned is that when you come with something that's innovative, organic, and that can actually disrupt the way of working, which is what's needed, things need disrupting, right? The problem is when you're working within an organization, right, and you're looking to disrupt what's in there, you're threatening someone's role, right? And like he was saying, what happens is you come to a crossroads where you're gonna do what the master says and and not disrupt, but do something that's that they're happy for you to do and they can take the credit for, and you get your little pay rise and you just cool off in a corner, right? Or you disrupt and you know, or you have to leave. The point is, you know, when you're working in an institution, a large one, I don't think it's not seen where there can be change made. You have to be external, number one. You know, I've worked in Hallam University for 7+ years now. I came up with a program that had proof in the pudding. It was shot down initially. It was a program that was for our people. I was accused of, is not going to create a ghetto in the university, right? To a point where the seniors are applauding it. Now, it came to a point where, okay, brilliant, it's worked. Okay, let us run it then. Give us the time, let us run with it. We'd like to do a train the trainer model and upscale what you're doing, meaning hand over the reins, etc., etc. I said, no, thanks, but no thanks, right? Now, so what I've learned is, you know what? Stop begging these people, right? To flipping change them nastiness, because they're not going to change nothing, right? It's not in their interest, right? You got to have your own ownership. And yeah, you got to have your things that can fill the gaps and supplement. And yeah, you can counsel, you can consult, you can educate, and hopefully, if they're sincere, they can buy into what you have and they can make sustainable, progressive change. But that's going to be few and far between. Let me tell you now, few and far between of the organizations who are going to sincerely disrupt what they're doing and change their operating fabric to integrate anti-racism into the organization. Few and far between. Therefore, with this program that we did, we decided, scrap you guys. What am I doing it inside here for? I'm bringing it to the community. Scrap you lot. So slowly but surely, get it accredited. It can be a leadership program for our people. It will hold some weight. And you know what? You know what it's like. You start something, you do it sincere, it will attract the attention. And it'll be something, hopefully, that's one of many things in the community that can start to build something for our people, because we need educating. We need to have leaders coming from our community, because if we're serious about our young ones, then where are our next leaders coming from? Are we relying on others to educate our next leaders? And we've got that skill set within ourselves.
Good point.
Yeah.
Still.
So for me, you know, because you know, I've done things in the community, but right now I'm focusing on doing this leadership program, getting it accredited, and sincerely having that as a way of contributing to hopefully what something that can sustain itself and produce future leaders from our communities. There's many things that can spin off from that, but that's a start, you understand? And the Unity Project, you're bringing people together. It is about somehow, where possible, working together, having synergies, leveraging people's skill sets and doing tangible, meaningful, progressive things. Do you know what I mean? Education is one of those things. There are other things as well. Of course, the sports, like you said about the kids knowing each other. You know, my kid went to flipping Tapton. He started Tapton a couple of weeks ago. The boy booked up in a fight in his second week, right? Now, as a Y7, he's booked up in a fight with a flipping Y11 kid. Guess what? It's a black kid as well. You know what I mean? Now, okay, chances are it's happened. You know, it's got squashed, but, you know, as you said before, we kind of knew each other. You know what I mean? Generally speaking, the Jamaican kids back in the day, we all knew each other, either directly or indirectly. You know what I'm saying? And the problem is nowadays, kids ain't going out unless it's going to be a controlled, monitored environment. Kids, you know what I'm saying? So that's why the reason why the kids ain't really linking up, because it ain't like it is back in the day. There's not so much freedom, man. Do you know what I mean? My kids say, you know, he's going basketball club, his mom's wondering, wait a minute, what time, this, that, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's governance, control.
I've got a question. You know what I mean? I've got a question for you, Acha, or Jennifer, whichever way you want to be. You know what I mean? I know you're an actress, so you know. Well, that's you, innit? End of the day, and we're in that environment, so we can feel comfortable. Yeah, well, I've got a few questions, but one of them was because when we're talking about black young people, more so in this day and age, more than when I was probably even younger, if I'm being perfectly honest, for various reasons, what's a part of another discussion. But when I think of black young people now, I think of black young people. So when we're talking about, like I said, Jamaicans, Jamie, then there's black Africans as well. You know, we're all the same people technically. We got split up because of certain things that happened in history, and we're starting to realize that now more. And if the more we become united as a full race, is the stronger we're going to be in the longer run. But the question is, what I've got for you actually is, the statistics what I looked at and found was that, and you might have discovered the same, some of the issues what we are having as black Caribbean young people and mixed Caribbean young people from black African backgrounds are not having the same difficulties or experiencing the same difficulties within the education system, i.e. they're achieving more. So what we had a discussion in the first live about that, but what do you think, or have you got any findings what you found around that? What's causing that?
Yeah, that's true, because I think the black African kids are even doing better than the white working class children.
Yeah,
because the white working
and is it culturally, because they've got more culture, more knowledge of self, more community, mum and dad still at home?
Well, I don't. That's a good point there because I remember it was about 2007. A head teacher highlighted that to me because I was working with some kids, and he just says, "Well, look, the Black African kids, you know, and I know some of them have come from some real harsh, war-torn countries, and they're excelling."
Mm.
I think there is an element of identity, definitely. So let me give you an example. I spoke to my dad one time and had a conversation about when he first came to the UK. And I said, so what was the first things what happened? And the thing that he highlighted was that it was the first time he experienced racism.
Mm.
And he was shocked when, you know, he got the racism. And then I says, and he started explaining about the different forms of racism he got, you know, at work when he was asking, I can do this. And it was like, oh, you know, you can't do it. And he says, I'll prove you wrong. So I goes, so what did you think, Dad? He goes, I thought it was all uncivilized. I thought British people were civilized because I thought it was uncivilized. But that point's really interesting right there because that racism that he encountered didn't affect him. He thought they had the problem. Yeah? He didn't look at him having the problem. Do I need to change myself? He looks at them.
Mm.
And that's why he could prove him wrong because he, you know what I mean? It's like getting invited to somebody's house and they don't show you hospitality. You leave and you go home because you think, well, that's your house. But that's the point. He never looked Britain as home. He saw Jamaica as home. I said, Dad, how old was you when he come here? He was in his 20s. So he went all the way through his 20s without experiencing racism, even though he didn't go to school, had no education, was on a farm in a rural part of Jamaica, yeah, getting a certain level of discipline that you couldn't do here, right? And he was built to succeed. But I think a lot of that is bound to identity. He knew where he was. Now,
And he knew who he was as well.
He knew who he was.
That's more
But
important.
here's the interesting thing. I can remember being a kid, yeah, growing up. Do you remember the National Front? I don't know if your guys.
Yeah.
I'm 46, so I remember the NF, yeah. And where I was living at that point, there was like followers of the NF. You knew who there was because they wore green jackets, bomber jacket, and docker boots, yeah. And it was a fashion as well as that. So the Union Jack and the flags and all that was with it. So, you know, I was always seeing that and knowing what there was about and that, you know, there was the far right group. And the flag was always attached to that. And then I remember, do you remember when I remember being in Nurse Primary School and watching Fergie and Andrew get married? And they made all the class watch it and watching fly these flags. I sat there as a black kid I think there was only 2 of us in the class. And I was looking at that and thinking, why are they making me watch this with all these flags? And I'm associating that flag with the National Front on the wall and this and that. And I remember having a conversation with one time with Michael Pitter, and he said something. He goes, do you know what it is, Jonathan? We've never had no place to call home. So when I went to Jamaica when I was 14, first time I felt English, because everybody was calling me English, you. Even the child. Listen,
Foreigner boy, you're foreigner boy.
I was there in Kingston for 6 weeks, yeah. And I remember, you know, are you young? I tried to pop style, go out with bare feet. I've got in them with brand new white trainers, yeah.
This is smell you a mile off, Richard.
Spot me a mile off. So after a few weeks, the new clothes, I started trying to rag them up. Go outside in bare feet, yeah, to try and blend in, play football in bare feet. I had to go back in and get my trainers. And listen, I never forget this one. Listen to this. Listen to this one.
Oh, you're English boy, that's why.
Yeah, you have to go back to the trainer.
I never forget this. I've gone in to a shop and there was a Chinese man behind the counter. And I've gone to, you know, give me one of the bag juice there. And the man said to me, "Where you from, England?" In a broad Jericho. I just knew I'm English, yeah. But that was the first time of feeling English. I had to go to Jamaica to feel British. Because we grew up in the era. We grew up in the era where John Barnes was getting bananas thrown up pigs. Remember that? You know, I grew up in the era. Remember that love thy neighbor? Yeah?
Yeah.
We grew up in the era where that was just overt racism was just common.
And then man there.
Yeah, that was just common.
So then, but then actually,
so let me just finish, man. Let me just finish this point because
Okay.
it's long, enough long. But the point is that going back to the African children,
yeah,
the element of knowing where you're from, your heritage, and your home, I think is definitely crucial to an individual's identity. A person's identity, I think, is crucial to their success.
Exactly.
I think it is, especially if you're living in a society where isms are going to be thrown at you. So when my dad came here, isms were thrown at him. Poor housing, racism, this and that. But it bounced off him. Because he thought, yo, guys, you stupid, watch what I'd show you. You know what I mean? Because he had a strong sense of identity. So to answer the question, Bente, I think that's the element, but you've got to look into it deeper as well.
Yeah, I think we agreed in agreeing with you. We kind of touched on that as well about identity and the strength of cultural identity from home. And then, like Kevin said earlier, we mentioned about the stats around married families and two-parent family households, because in the African culture, that's stronger than the Caribbean culture.
But there's another thing. Sorry to cut you there, Bente. There's another thing. If you look at the South Asian community right now, Pakistani boys especially, they have a strong sense of identity and culture. They have the mother tongue. They're coming from religious families where parents are still together. But look what's happening to a lot of them right now. They're going through that system and that experience of jails, shooting, drugs, gang. They're going through that.
But are they having the same? Are they having the same identity crisis that we are, though? Like, as in, like you said, they're not identifying as English.
Can I just ask the question, though? Because I think it's relevant to what you're going to say.
Let me just finish the point, though. I was going to make. The point is this: I think it's not so much of identity crisis. It's about being proud of your identity. I think if you look at some of these, if you look at some of the kids from sort of Middle Eastern countries and South Asian countries, listen to what they're listening to. They're listening to black music. Close your eyes and listen to how they're speaking. They're speaking with black patois cultural dialect. So I think it's just not being about, it's not about having an identity and knowing it, it's about being proud of it as well.
Proud of it. So you kind of answered what I was gonna say before I asked it. Because what I was gonna say is, from what you're saying, it would suggest then that if the Black African communities stay here long enough and have children, because we're like born here, aren't we? So when their children are born here and become Black African British or whatever label you want to give them, does that mean then that they're going to start underachieving as well, or they're going to still have that strength of identity?
Well, it's what he said about the pride, because if you think about it logically, even like just the wearing of the clothes, like certain Rasta man and certain things. We used to have a lot of Rastas in Sheffield before, and now that's kind of like put away because it's not what the jobs want to see, or it's not what the community wants to see. And the same goes for some people in other communities. Their cultural dress, their cultural attire, the way they culturally carry themselves is not accepted in this place. So we have to learn to like put it away. You understand what I'm trying to say? Because you'll be mocked. And I suppose that even comes down to black women's hair, doesn't it? Because a lot of black women feel like they can't just rock the afro because in this place it's not accepted. So you have to straighten up your hair, or you have to curl your hair, which means technically every time we do this, you're throwing your own culture in the bin. And when you do that, you're throwing your own identity in the bin.
You're not your authentic self.
You're not your authentic self, and it's not allowed, it's not permitted, it's not accepted.
But here's the other thing as well, the other damaging thing. Do you remember growing up and people from Black Caribbean backgrounds dissing Africans?
Yeah, back in the 80s.
Listen, I heard it the other day from
Voodoo Scratcher. This, that, the other.
There's a lot of black African children that are our generation now that grew up getting bullied by black Caribbean children and getting this, and getting this African bullies. There wasn't a black African sort of popular sort of culture. So
at that time,
no rapper, no, Akon come through now, but there wasn't no, it all came from the Caribbean. The Caribbean has produced, and African Americans have produced some of the sort of what they say is the coolest people.
That's what?
That's your key.
I don't know why.
Because the door's open and it needs.
Hey, put that on mute, please, Jamie.
Yeah, Jane.
But,
So you see what you're saying there, Archer. Sorry to cut you again in a sense, but because I was going to say it's kind of reaffirmed for me what I've always thought, that Jamaica, not to this, because I'm obviously of Caribbean heritage, but not to this Jamaica, but Jamaica is heritage, is only the tip of the iceberg. So our culture, even though it's popular to the Europeans and the wider world, because we've had more of a interference from that European kind of involvement. So it's more resonatable to a lot of people, whereas the African culture is the real deal. So yes, that's kind of like being shoved under the carpet or pushed to one side. But actually, so that's why they've got that strength in identity, because it's real. Ours is like watered down, even though it's popular to everybody and everybody enjoys it. Ours is watered down. So probably I'm just thinking maybe that's why we haven't got that.
Well, the way to answer that question is look at the past 600 years. Yeah. And then once you understand that, then you've answered that question right there.
Yeah.
We wasn't, we didn't go to Jamaica because it was a voluntary, thing. We settled there. We ended up there through the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
And we've just, it's like you can't cut off that part of history and just say it started in Jamaica. No, that's not your history. Because if you cut off the root of a plant, what happens to it? It dies.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at, it's crazy to do that, because then you're not looking at history. Then you're not looking at African culture. Then you won't learn about Mansa Musa, who was one of the wealthiest people who ever walked this planet.
Yeah.
You won't learn of Timbuktu. You won't learn about all these things. That's part of your heritage.
Yeah. To give you that
And
pride.
plus the fact that we speak Patois, which is basically broken English, tells you everything about your lineage anyway.
We haven't got another language, have we? We've only got Patois.
It's just that simple.
Dialect.
Yeah, it's just that simple. The language what you speak should tell you everything what you need to know about your lineage. Because technically speaking, even them Africans what were took there should still be speaking African.
But they weren't allowed,
but they're not. So now we speak Patois. So it is what it is. But we have to conclude this, guys, because I can see this going on. So we have to bring it to the, to the crux, which is what I was saying, is basically the community is essentially important, and it is all our responsibilities. It's not just one person's responsibility, and we need to start coming together more often in peace and love to promote these things more and to educate each other. Steel sharpens steel, that's what they say. Iron sharpens iron. So the more we reason, the more we talk, the more we get this word out there, the more people can start to actually come out of the little shells and start doing something.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. I agree with that. So unless anybody's got anything to add, it's been a fantastic live. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, Jonathan, for coming, and thank you for giving us that wonderful account of your findings and sharing your journey with us. Yeah. And I hope you'll come back on another time and let us know when you've graduated. We want to celebrate your hard work.
Yeah. When I actually, there was something, when I've actually written it up and I've graduated and I've done it, I'll come and share the overall findings. It'll be good. So I hope it'll be next year, 2022.
And also, also Kenny as well, at some stage, it sounds like we're probably gonna it would be a good idea to have a bit of a follow up with your thing as well, and discuss how that's going, and how people can get involved in that and what's not.
Yeah, man, happy to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
All right.
Yeah, and if everybody could help with when we post this out, if everybody could help spreading it, because obviously the more people watch it and the more people see it, then the better. Innit? So yeah, we are responsible for trying to get the message and the word out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next Flix and Chat, hopefully, if everything goes well, if there's no change, the next Flix and Chat, we're looking hopefully to focus on fatherhood. Watching the movie, what's still showing on Netflix with Kevin Hart, which hopefully can spark off some discussions about fatherhood, in particular, obviously in the Black community, and what that looks like. And
What's the film called?
Fatherhood on Netflix.
Fatherhood.
Yeah.
Okay.
So just some
Right.
discussions sparked from, that's going to like inspire some discussions hopefully as well around that kind of issue. So that's the idea.
Okay.
Moving forwards.
All right, guys.
All right, respect everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, but good to see
Come on,
everybody.
bless, respect.
For the turnout.
Bless,
Yes, look after yourselves, man.
Excellent.
Take care.
Later.